Penguin Random House Audio presents Valley of Forgetting, Alzheimer's Families and the Search for a Cure by Jennie Erin Smith. Read for you by Carolina Hoyos. For the Families. Part 1. Curious Doctors. Chapter 1. A thick brown file tells the story of a man named Pedro Julio Pulgarin, who, on October 9, 1984, was escorted against his will through the gates of the San Vicente de Paul Hospital in Medellin, Colombia. Pedro Julio was 49 years old, balding, and missing his upper teeth. He was what local people called a montañero, a term that loosely translates to hillbilly, but with a nobler connotation. Pedro Julio had raised cows in the mountains above a town called Belmira for his entire adult life, until a few months before, when he'd started wandering off into pastures and getting lost. His family feared that, in that rugged terrain of hills and boulders, he would get himself killed. His wife and some of their children left their highland farm for a house in town, where they could secure him indoors and keep tabs on him. There, however, things only got worse. Pedro Julio grew frustrated, filled with the urge to wander, and his family grew concerned that he might get hold of a knife or rock and hurt them if they didn't let him out. This was out of character for Pedro Julio, who was known to all as a loving father, a Catholic devoted to his saints, a hard worker and shrewd. He had saved money furiously, acquiring enough through leases and purchases and fortunate bets in country taverns to leave some land to every one of his 12 living children. Now he could not remember their names. A rural doctor had treated Pedro Julio with niacin to see if his confusion might improve, but the vitamin had no effect, and the doctor advised the family to take him to a hospital in Medellin, a 3-hour journey over unpaved roads. The San Vicente Hospital was affiliated with the University of Antioquia, Medellin's preeminent public university. Its early 20th century campus of low buildings with tall windows, tile roofs, chapels, and gardens was a relic from an era when hospitals were meant to heal souls as well as bodies. A neurology resident named William Cornejo, one of the first doctors to evaluate Pedro Julio, entered his notes by hand. Farmer, 2 years of primary school and worked until 2 months ago. Until 4 years ago, he was completely fine. He was intelligent. 2 years following onset, he could not distinguish family relations. 4 months ago, he presented with marked disorientation in general and in space and time, neglect of personal hygiene, emotional laity passing easily from crying to laughing, with delusions of persecution. He hears and sees things, irritability and incoherence. At the initiation of his current illness, he complained of pain in the back of his head. In the clinic, Pedro Julio barely spoke, except in the empty phrases people used to fill space in conversation. Ave Maria, Lord Almighty, así es la cosa, here's the thing. He could still make the sign of the cross, but he could no longer count more than 2 digits in a row. He lost his patience with Cornejo, saying he'd have no more pendejadas, bullshit. 3 of Pedro Julio's uncles had died after a similar course of illness, his wife reported. So had a brother at age 52. His mother had died in a government mental hospital at 50, apparently of the same causes. If we'd been practicing medicine then the way we're supposed to today, I would have prescribed him a sedative for the agitation and sent him home, Cornejo recalled. Instead, Cornejo hospitalized Pedro Julio. Here was what looked like a case of senile dementia in a man too young to have it. Alzheimer's, he wrote in his notes. The next day, however, Pedro Julio left the hospital. He walked out through the front gates of San Vicente and into the streets of downtown Medellin as though they were the green, boulder-strewn hills of Belmira. Patient escaped the service, his file read. The patient took leave despite being under our observation and was followed. It was impossible to make him return as he became aggressive. The guards and doorman could not detain him. The social workers and family have been advised. He was headed downtown. More than 3 decades later, William Cornejo still remembered the fright Pedro Julio's disappearance gave him. When the patient was returned to the hospital late that same day, the resident sought help in making sense of this wandering farmer. He turned to his colleague Francisco Lopera Restrepo. Handsome and unflappable in his demeanor, with wavy hair already turning gray, Lopera was a third-year neurology resident whom everyone called Pacho. Pacho was really into neuropsychology, Cornejo recalled. He'd been studying how language worked and memory and all that. At 33, Lopera was a little older than the other residents. It had taken him 9 years to finish his undergraduate degree, thanks to protests and strikes, and after medical school, he'd put in a 3-year stint on the country's Caribbean coast, near Panama, as a government physician. Like his patient, Pedro Julio Pulgarin, Lopera was a paisa, a term that usually means compatriot or countryman, but in Colombia refers to anyone with roots in Antioquia, the mountainous central northwest department that is home to Medellin and a constellation of country towns. Paisas are famed as polite, thrifty, hardworking, and supremely religious. They will cross themselves in front of churches, even while passing them on the metro, and bless you while selling you potato chips on a bus. They maintain certain rural ways, even in the city. The traditional paisa diet consists of simple foods prepared without much spice: beans, meats, rice, hearty soups, arepas made of ground corn, fruit juices, and fresh cheese. Some paisas are still wary of the fork and knife, considering the spoon up to any challenge. Paisas are the heirs of Spanish colonists who clambered through these mountains on mule trains in the 16th and 17th centuries looking for gold. They are also descended from the indigenous Colombians who first broke those mountain paths, and of the Africans forced into slave gangs to dam and dredge the gold-bearing rivers. But they tend to downplay these lineages in favor of their European roots. In the 18th century, the paisas turned to agriculture, establishing fincas in Antioquia's cooler uplands. They built farmhouses of wood beams and earthen walls that they decorated with hanging plants and filled with children, such staggering numbers of children that some of the old houses feel more like convents or dormitories. They grew sugar and coffee and every type of fruit and vegetable in the fertile soils of Antioquia, and with centuries of experience moving goods around on mules, and of hiding their gold from the tax collectors of the Spanish crown, they proved good at business and finance. By the late 19th century, Medellin, the hub of their trade and the seat of their power, became so prosperous that envious elites in Bogotá spread rumors that paisas were the descendants of Jews. It was meant as a slander, but the paisa establishment grew to embrace it, in part because it resonated with their ideas about being abler, more European, a raza apart. Lopera was raised some 20 miles from where Pedro Julio lived, in the same Catholic, conservative, rugged mountain culture. The 1950s, when he was growing up, were the height of la violencia, a time of political massacres all over Colombia. A reactionary local bishop, Miguel Ángel Vélez, had loudly and repeatedly declared liberalism to be a mortal sin, and he encouraged locals to deal with the threat as they saw fit. Lopera's grandfather was killed in a knife fight, and as a little boy he watched his father, a conservative, stand in the town square and deliver an
Sample complete. Ready to continue?